Hello, welcome to this week's edition of Healthline. My friend, I'm glad. Thank you for tuning into the maiden edition of the broadcast, Healthline. We designed this broadcast to exclusively focus on health and wellness issues, matters of health that concern you. That's why, by the way, food poisoning caught our attention. Our guest today is Dr. B. Tadzong Fomundam. I have to say, Dr. B. Tadzong Fomundam has been among our most passionate supporters at Chat Night Africa. At some point in life, we attend social occasions at which we eat and drink. We go with friends and family members to restaurants. Unfortunately, upon return, some people fall very sick and some even die of serious illnesses. That's scary. So, what's going on? What actions of ours inadvertently lead to food poisoning, which is the topic today? These questions and more, ladies and gentlemen, as we now invite you to join us, welcome our star guest, Dr. B. Tadzong Fomundam, on the platform. Dr. B. Tadzong Fomundam, thank you for accepting my invitation to come on the maiden edition of Healthline on Chat Night Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chamukong. How are you today?
I am good. We'll be talking about important things, especially when you talk about health and understanding that health is wealth. Now people can see why we dedicated the maiden edition of Healthline to the subject, food poisoning. Dr. B. Tadzong Fomundam, why should somebody sit here and listen to you speak on the subject, food poisoning?
So I'm going to give you my little public health spiel. We often hear or talk about many health initiatives and campaigns, but do we know what really powers these movements? We have heard about health for all by the year 2000 or 2020. We have heard let us eradicate polio, let us stop HIV, clean water for all, wash your hands, keep your environment clean. Public health has been the most powerful and effective tool used in preventing disease and promoting or protecting the health of large swaths of the human population. We breathe public health, but we are not aware of it. From the moment you wake up in the morning until you go back to bed, public health is constantly being employed to protect your health. The water you use, your sewage system, the food you eat, personal body products, the environment you work or live in, your school, your home, your living conditions, your garbage disposal, the safety of the tools you use, the safety of your entertainment locations and equipments, all of those are being protected by public health. One thing we all do is eat and drink at least water. Do we ever wonder who pays attention so that these things do not make us sick? We have recently heard of a deadly case of food poisoning in Cameroon. In fact, they are becoming more frequent and in other parts of the world. The safety of our food from the farm to the table is protected by public health measures. Failure in the system could be deadly. Health departments are supposed to monitor the sources of our foods, how the raw foods are handled and transported to prevent excessive bacterial growth, how the foods are stored to protect their integrity, how foods are prepared to ensure destruction of bacteria, and how the food is handled or stored after preparation to prevent proliferation of bacteria or toxins. Failure to monitor or implement any of these measures can be debilitating or deadly. Apart from preventing, promoting, and protecting the general population, health departments also investigate illnesses. When we have outbreaks of diseases, they investigate it. And the goal is to identify what is happening, what caused it, curb the spread of the disease, and come up with protective measures in case similar things happen in the future. So the reason we're talking about food poisoning today and the reason you should listen is because Approximately 1 in 6 people will have food poisoning every year. So that means that most of us are going to get sick at some point during the year because of food poisoning. So this is something that affects most people. It doesn't matter how careful you are. There are many ways to have food poisoning. So the goal of this conversation is one, to identify it and to help us prevent it and to mitigate it when we do have it. So that is why you should listen today.
Thank you, Dr. Bita Zong from Mundam, for firing the first shot. Now, there have been reports, and many of them from across Africa, of people eating or drinking and falling ill or dying shortly afterwards. We also know of cases where someone eats something as simple as groundnuts, peanuts is called in the United States, and has to be rushed to the hospital. How do you distinguish between food poisoning and food allergies?
In a sense, they are similar, but not quite. Food poisoning is one, food is contaminated in some way or form. Number two, it is ingested, food or water, actually, because you can get poisoning too from contaminated water and liquids. So it is ingested. And number three, it makes the person sick. Food allergies, of course, some it's food. The food does not have to be contaminated, but it acts as a poison to the person's body because the person's immune system rejects it. And so the body puts up a fight, even though there's really nothing. The body misidentifies the food as something that irritates the body, and it puts up a reaction or a response. And this is what we normally call food allergies. And it could happen, the symptoms are distinct from food poisoning. In that food poisoning, you have more of inflammation and irritation, but with with food allergies, you have a response that is set up by the immune system, and it starts off with firing histamines and so on. So you could start off with itching, you could have rash, you could have swelling, and it's usually in the throat where it can compromise your breathing, or in different parts of the body. And so that is the distinction between food poisoning and food allergies.
Oftentimes, when we go to parties, receptions, at social occasions, people grab groundnuts. I'm using groundnuts because a lot of our viewers now and later are more familiar with groundnuts than peanuts. And peanuts, it's the word for groundnuts in the United States. So we grab these things, we eat. We grab this, we eat. Are there ways which people can actually test to know what foods they are allergic to? When somebody comes to see you at your clinic or in your office and ask, Doc, can I test for food allergies? Can I test my child for food allergies? Can I test my son, daughter, or even myself, or my dad, mom, aunties, uncles? What would be your response?
Yes, there are ways to test. The first thing is that unfortunately, a lot of people find out the hard way. They eat something that everybody else eats, and then they have a reaction. Sometimes it's a mild reaction, sometimes it's a severe reaction in which, their lives are at risk. And then if you have had such a reaction and you don't know what it is in response to, usually what we'll do is refer the person for allergy testing. So we will send them to an allergist and an immunologist, because it's a controlled environment, and they test different samples of foods and substances on the person to see what they respond to that causes an allergic reaction. So yes, it can be tested for. It's usually quite expensive. And for the most part, we wouldn't refer somebody unless they have severe allergies or unless they had a really bad allergy to something and they didn't know what it was. But most people tend to recognize what made them allergic. And so we usually say they just avoid it.
We go to weddings, we go to graduation ceremonies, we go to birthday ceremonies, and after which we are invited to a reception and the people eat a lot. Recently in Cameroon, we heard of stories where people attended a wedding and afterwards, a lot of them just died. Some were rushed to hospital. We heard of stories where somewhere, I think in the West region, children, and all of a sudden, a lot of them were being rushed to hospitals. We have gone to we've seen these things happen so many times. Recently, still in Cameroon, a family ate something that they cooked at home, and children died. I was just reading online where people made what they call odontor, what they call afofo, the very strong alcoholic beverage, and drank, and some people were just dropping off their feet like chicken. What actions of ours could inadvertently lead to food poisoning? And even though we don't have details, because I love detail, I mean, doctors like to talk about details and specifics. But all these scenarios I've cited, would you say or food allergies or food poisoning or just some criminal behavior?
It could be any of those. So first of all, let's just talk a little bit about the different kinds of food contamination. There are three main types. There is chemical, there's physical, and there's biological. So chemical is, for example, food that is harvested. It's been sprayed with a lot of chemicals, and it's not properly washed, or even with washing, they don't get rid of all the chemicals on the food, and people eat it and it makes them sick. For example, in some parts of the world, people they get fish out of the water using gamalin, and right there the gamalin poisons the fish. So there's not much you can do to help yourself if you're exposed to that kind of stuff, because you can't quite see it when you're looking at the fish, but once you take it in, it can cause food poisoning. Then there's biological contamination, where food is contaminated by things that are produced by other living creatures, and we'll talk about it down the line. And then there's also physical contamination, where sometimes it's really like foreign objects in your food. For example, maybe a dirty piece of rag or some hair or anything that doesn't normally belong in food. So one of the clues when you talk about it is when people attend an occasion and a lot of them fall sick. That's a huge warning sign. It tells you that something is wrong with the food, because one, those people were well before they went to that occasion. Number two, most of the people that attended the occasion, or a good number of people that got sick, came straight from the occasion with the illness. So that always tells you that something happened with the food at the occasion. There could be other things, but usually that's kind of a clue that there's a problem.
When you travel around African countries, you see the way food is sold at our marketplaces. Could that be the source of some of the food contamination or the food poisoning? Or if you just buy your food, your tomato comes sliced, fried, deep fried, cook it, and all the germs are gone. Honestly, I traveled to Cameroon last year, and I just, out of curiosity, thought I should see what's happening at our markets, and I couldn't believe. And this is not something unique to Cameroon. You go to towns in Nigeria, towns in Ghana, all across Africa, people sell food near garbage dumpsters, mountains of garbage. Speak to people around it. People are watching you right now.
So what you're talking about when you travel is called traveler's diarrhea. But the other thing you're talking about is really food handling. And that is a big problem. Remember, I gave that little spiel at the beginning about how public health protects the general population. These are things that are major public health issues, and they should be addressed by leadership, governments, and so on, because individuals cannot necessarily implement public health policies. Those are things that governments do. And so food contamination can happen at one of multiple stages. It could be at the point of production, so which is where they grow the food, where they harvest it, and so on. It could be at the time of distribution or preparation, distribution, and then also so for example, what is happening in this case is at the point of transportation and distribution of the food. So we don't even know how they transported the food from where it was produced to the market where they're selling it. But it's always a terrible thing when you see people selling food near all kinds of waste. There's no way that you're not going to have cross contamination. Sometimes it could be the food is sitting on a dirty ground, or there's even dirty liquid flowing from garbage and maybe from sewage close by. Sometimes people are easing themselves close to the food, like urinating right next to your food market, or maybe even defecating because they don't have access to toilets and so on. And then sometimes even flies would leave from the garbage and come straight to the food. And we know about flies. Flies usually feed off of dirty food, of stool, and so on. So when you have all of this dirt piling up and all the dirty things happening around food, it is highly likely that the food is going to get contaminated. So that is a problem. And then another part again, which I think we should expand upon as we answer more questions, is that when you bring that food, when you get it from wherever you bought it, sometimes it's already contaminated. By the time you get it home and you prepare it, it could only make things worse. So if you don't handle it properly and you get it home and you don't prepare it properly, it only makes things worse.
You talked about growing and growing as being growing, how we even grow the food. Could you explain? We understand that when people grow vegetables, usually they take maybe it's droppings of chicken, cow dung, compost manure, fertilizers, and so on. How, in the process of growing, could that lead to food poisoning on somebody's table? You would think that when you grow food, from the time it's harvested to the time that it's brought to your table, kitchen table, any possibility of contamination would have been eliminated. So speak to us. How can that happen at the process of even growing the food?
All right, so there's something we call the food production chain. This is where the food begins and where it ends. It begins usually in the farm or in some kind of garden, and it ends up in your home, in your plate, and probably in your stomach. So let's talk about the 4 steps where contamination can happen, because it can happen in any one of those steps. It could happen during production, it could happen during processing, during distribution, and during preparation. So, for example, production. I have something. If you ever have time, you can visit the NIH website or the FDA website. There are some really good resources there, and it talks about the 4 steps: production, processing, distribution, and preparation. So, production, for example, a lot of times, where do we grow food? In farms. Usually, most farms have some animals and some plants, right? So you have the animals that are producing a lot of feces. The animals may get the animals may get infected with some kind of bacteria and or viruses or whatever. We know all the different things that infect people. And so one, those animals are infected. Those animals are probably going to pass on what they have to the human beings. Number two, a lot of times people use the manure from animals to fertilize their food. So you carry the contaminated manure and you fertilize the food with it. And so that food is now automatically contaminated. You don't even stand a chance. Because once you use contaminated manure to fertilize food, you have already contaminated the food. So by the time you harvest it from the farm, it's already contaminated. So there are many other things. Now, if you use dirty water, that's another thing. People think you can just spray water when the food grows, it's good to go. Well, if this water is contaminated, like it's coming from some place where there's a well and then there's a sewage disposal thing close by. You remember this about water. Water flows. Water is always flowing. So if you have a sewage plant and you have a well, there's going to be cross contamination. Some stuff is going to leak from the sewage into the water at some point. And then what even makes it worse is when we have things like flooding. You have seen one of the biggest problems after flooding is that it's like you've just mixed up everything, the clean, the dirty. And so things that are around it tend to be contaminated. So that's another way. And then things like fish and so on, if we have contaminated waters, the fish are going to get contaminated. So by the fish or the seafood, by the time you get it out of the water, it's already contaminated. And then another thing too, you need to remember, the bigger fish tend to have more contamination because the bigger fish feed off of the smaller animals in the water. And so what they do is they accumulate a lot of the contaminants from the smaller fish in their own body. So that's the point of production. Point of processing. Processing is anything that you need to do to prepare the food from harvesting it to getting it ready for transportation. So you may need to wash it, you may need to rinse it, you may need to cut it, you may need to shred it, you may need to do some light processing. And all of those things they raise the risk of contamination. So what if you're using dirty equipment to harvest the food? Or you're using not so clean water to rinse the food before packaging it? Or you're shredding it and you're using dirty equipment? Or you're using equipment that has not been properly cleaned? So sometimes people may use maybe a knife to cut an animal, and then they use it without really washing it properly to cut the plant. So that increases the risk of cross-contamination. So that's the point of processing. So what happens is that anytime that damage has occurred to the food, it just gets worse moving forward. The next thing is distribution of the food. So getting it from where it was produced and processed to where they're going to sell it or do whatever they need to do with the food. So one could be that they transport the food in the wrong temperatures, or they transport the food in contaminated equipment. So if you have trucks, let's say, especially it's usually very common during the hot seasons. When it's hot, bacterial growth multiplies quickly. So when it's hot out there and you transport food, let's say food that is supposed to be frozen, you transport it to a place where they have to, you're supposed to transport it to where they're going to sell it, like the grocery store. If you don't manage the temperature of your transportation equipment properly, bacteria is going to just multiply in the food. Number two, sometimes people take clean food and they put it in dirty and contaminated trucks. So maybe they transported animals before, they didn't clean the truck, and they threw some vegetables in there or some or some fresh produce. And so we have again what we call cross contamination. So that is the third step along the food production chain that can cause food damage. And then the last one is food preparation. In fact, the distribution also includes how you handle the food from when you buy it to when you take it home to either store it or to prepare it. So usually people buy stuff and they just throw everything in the cart. You're supposed to separate foods, ready-made, ready-to-eat foods. You're supposed to separate those from produce, and you're supposed to separate those two from animal, animal, animal grocery. Because what happens is that the animal proteins and so on tend to have juices, and if those animal proteins are contaminated, they're going to leak into the other things. So sometimes people buy those things, they don't put them in bags, or you buy things where the wraps have been opened up. You know, if you're buying something that is sealed, it should be properly sealed. If it looks funny or smells funny, that is always a warning sign. But even if it's not properly sealed, if it's been tampered with, you need to avoid those things. So that's part of distribution. And then preparation is when you take the food home, what do you do with it? So when we take food home, we should, when you're doing grocery, you have to plan ahead. So you can buy the dried foods first and leave the fresh foods and the meat and so on for last. Because that way, after I buy this stuff, I'm going straight home. Your goal should be to get that food into the refrigerator or the freezer within 2 hours of doing grocery. And if it's on a hot day with temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, your goal is to get those things into the refrigerator within 1 hour of when you acquire them. So if it's hot, you want to keep it hot. If it's cold, you want to keep it cold. But again, your goal is to get those things into safe storage temperatures within 2 hours on a normal day, or 1 hour in temperatures greater than or equal to 90 degrees Celsius. And then food preparation, it could be prepared at home, in restaurants, in hotels, wherever. There are many things that could go wrong during food preparation. So from, when you bring the food home, what do you do with it? There are 4 things that you're supposed to do. You're supposed to wash, you're supposed to separate, you're supposed to chill, and you're supposed to cook. People bring food home again, people cross-contaminate because they put everything together. Then you bring the food and you're putting in the refrigerator and you're not paying attention to what you're doing. Food that is ready to be eaten should always be handled with the utmost care, because that means that there's nothing standing between your mouth and the food. So there's nothing to help you if that food is contaminated, like cooking or whatever it is that you need to do. So when you have that food, you should always keep it away from everything else. And what we normally recommend when we're doing inspections of restaurants is to store those kinds of foods in the top of the refrigerator where nothing can drip onto them. And then when you have the next thing will be the produce, the fresh produce like vegetables and fruits. And if you're putting them in the refrigerator, you want to put them in the next shelf so that they're protected from the next set of things, which are things like the dairy, the meats, and all those things that are juicy. Because if anything is juicy, chances are it's going to have some dripping occurring. And you don't want it dripping on your fresh foods or foods that are not going to be cooked to very high temperatures or ready to go foods. So then when you cook the food, what do you do with it? That's the other question. Remember, foods should be kept in a safe temperature. The danger zone is between 40 degrees and 140 degrees. When you cook food, your goal is to either eat it quickly or chill it quickly. And if on a regular day, again, remember the handling of food. On a regular day, you don't want to keep food out for more than 2 hours after cooking it. Once after 2 hours, that food should be refrigerated. If it's on a hot day with temperatures above 90 degrees, that food should be refrigerated after 1 hour. So, but if you're going to serve a party, what do you do? One, you want to keep separating those foods, but you also want to make sure that you keep cold foods cold, so below 40 degrees, and hot foods hot, above 140 degrees. The reason is because bacteria enjoy growth during normal room temperatures and in that danger zone, 40 to 140. So if you keep the food in that room temperature or within 40 to 140, the statistics have shown that bacteria can double every 20 minutes. So you can get food that is maybe slightly contaminated, and if you cooked it, you'll be fine. And you let it sit around, and the bacteria just multiply. By the time you eat it, you don't stand a chance. You probably would have food poisoning. So I hope that that kind of gives us a little picture of what can go wrong with food.
You are watching Healthline, its maiden edition on Chat Night Africa.
We love Chat Night Africa. Keep watching Chat Night Africa.
And my guests on Healthline today is Dr. B. Tatzong Fumunda. The topic is food poisoning and what triggered the topic coming, or what triggered the decision to bring the topic on Healthline today is the situation or the reports that we've been receiving from across Africa. Children go to school, they eat, they come and fall sick. Some are rushed to hospital, some die. Others attend graduation ceremonies. They attend receptions at weddings, and then they come back sick. Some die. People just cook their own foods and eat. I mean, they cooked it themselves, and then what happens later on is unfortunate. Let me take you to what happens inside a reception hall. I cannot imagine anybody who has not attended a party. I can't. Now, as somebody from Cameroon, when we attend parties, there's what they call ndole, you have salads, you know, and I have to be honest with you, I've attended some parties, eaten ndole and gone home, and it's just, my stomach is rumbling like thunder. I'm going to the toilet so many times a night. It sometimes, my stomach just gripes, and it's so uncomfortable. When you see ndole, I'm talking because that's a common dish. Ekwang, ndole, ero, achu, at receptions. Ooh, that sitting there, we're hungry. Maybe there was such service, people were making endless speeches. By the time we're rushing into this, people are really hungry. What should we do?
Okay, so this is the food preparation and serving it to people. So one of the problems with parties is that a lot of people cook good food. I'm not going to lie about that. And just hearing about those foods make me hungry. They make my mouth water. But a lot of people don't realize what it takes to handle food. If more people realize it, they probably be worried about serving people food in general. So when you go to a party, first of all, most of the times food is cooked by many different people. So number one, you don't even know how they acquire the food from the store until when they prepared it. You don't know what methods they've used to prepare the food. You don't know what measures they've taken to prevent contamination. And then, of course, they prepare the food. They don't take it straight to the hall. They get ready to go to the party, and then they take the food. Or sometimes they drop off the food early, come back home and get ready. So what does that mean? That food is sitting around for a while. Now, if somebody is, what I'm seeing more and more people do, and which is a commendable thing, but which we should do more often, is that when that food comes in, we ought to keep it hot, because most of the foods we're serving are hot foods. Now, with salads and all those things, you want to keep them cold. Maybe make sure you have a good working refrigerator that people are not opening too often, because the problem too is that when you have a refrigerator and you're opening it often, the temperature drops. So you want to make sure you have a refrigerator that is restricted to access, so that when you keep the food in there, it's closed and the temperature stays below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The food on the table should be covered. You should have it heated to temperatures over 140 degrees Fahrenheit, because remember, when we have food sitting in the danger zone, it is inevitable. Bacteria and contamination is going to occur, because those bacteria are multiplying very fast. And there's just no way to stop it except to hold the food at proper temperatures. Another thing is, you want to restrict how much people stick their hands in the food. Now, it's good to have people that serve the food, because sometimes you have people that come in there, they use dirty cutlery to serve themselves. Some people will put stuff in their mouth and put it back in there. Some people use dirty hands. Some people's clothes are rubbing in, we wear some nice clothes, and sometimes they are huge and all over the place, and they're rubbing over the food. You don't know where that dress has been. Maybe I just came from the restroom, and now my dress from the restroom that is rubbed in the restroom is rubbing in the food. And so those are little funny ways that contamination occurs. You leave the food open, people are passing by, you don't know what is dropping off of their clothes, you don't know what is dropping off of their mouths and everything. You don't know what is maybe crawling around that has gotten into the food. And so you really want to be mindful of that, because it's nice to receive people for an occasion. But personally, I think one of the worst things that can happen is to entertain people and they go back and they're sick. That's just something people never really forget. It takes them a long time to move past that, especially with respect to you as an individual. So it's always very personal for me. And if you're throwing an occasion, you want to be mindful. One, who is preparing the food? How are they handling the food? Number two, how long is the food going to be sitting around before people eat it? Number three, who is going to be serving the food? I think we can take a cue. When you go to a lot of these hotels and stuff, what do? They don't keep the food out there. When we go to our regular occasions, we have a buffet laid out. People come in, the food is sitting there for hours and hours before you eat. And then when you get to the food, of course, there's all the thing about serving and people coming in and putting things in the food, touching with their hands and so on. And so you know, if you go to, like I said, some of these nice hotels, when you let them cater to your food, they don't keep the food sitting around, but when they bring the food, they serve it quickly. And that's a lot of times now, they make you sit at the table and they come and serve you. Sometimes you can go around to the buffet table, but they move things fast because they don't want this food sitting around for long. I think, you know, that can help us have a perspective of how we can
And
food.
and I've seen situations, Doc, that people, especially at African receptions, you've not met a friend for a long time, and the only time you can chat with a friend is around the time you're queuing up to go get your food, fill your plate, and you find people talking, having a conversation over food, dishing the food and talking over that food, or appreciating how delicious the food looks, even though the taste of the pudding is in the mouth. They're talking, they're running all these commentaries and so on. And sometimes I can understand the organizers of the occasion sometimes are uncomfortable calling people to order, but that's what should be done because it's about the health of people. Let me take you back to growing the food, because back home now in Africa, you know, at first when we were in primary school, we used to have the compost manure and all of that. And we were told to build compost heaps, get the manure and manure the crops and so on. Now, these days, people use pesticides, which is becoming a problem. You doctors say we should eat fruits. I go and load all these fruits from the store and come. What's the risk of eating the pesticides? What am I to do? The vegetables I get, the fruits I get, how am I to handle them in a way that the pesticides used in spraying the crops or the fruits and vegetables at the time of cultivation don't get transmitted into my body?
Mr. Chamukong, it's really hard to completely avoid it because right now we're in the age of mass food production. And when you produce in such large quantities, you have to preserve. And also when you're producing, it means it's costing you a lot of money. So you want to make sure that you're not losing the food before it gets out of the farm. Remember, we are living with a lot of other creatures in this world. So they don't farm. I've never seen a goat or a chicken or a cow go and farm. So they eat off of what we prepare or what nature puts out there. So we have to think about all these things, these complexities. So when you have food, the reason why they spray all these chemicals is one, to prevent other organisms from coming to the food. And unfortunately, that doesn't only deter those organisms, but a lot of times it poisons us as humans. So we have to start looking again at what it is that our priorities are. It is nice to be able to have all this food, but at what cost? And if you notice, a lot of people are becoming more aware. They are more willing to do organic. And I'm going to say, you know, it's kind of spreading everywhere now. But when we grew up in Cameroon, I think most of what we ate was organic. There are people that put a lot of fertilizers and chemicals in the food, but when people ate those foods, they got sick. And I remember growing up with something like the vegetable. I think here they call it huckleberry. We call it jama jama. You know, there are places where people would never buy in jama jama from. They would say, "Oh, these people put chemicals in the jama jama," and you know, because every time you eat it, you just have a terrible gastrointestinal symptoms, diarrhea, rumbling stomach, just feeling sick for a while. So people need to avoid those places. And I think usually if you're trying to sell food and people are avoiding it, that should send a message to you that we do not like what you're doing to the food. We want you to sell food to us that is not being poisoned with chemicals. Now, one of the other things again is going organic. And that's another complicated thing too, because sometimes people play games. But what I'm finding most people are doing is doing some gardening in their backyards. That helps. But you want to do raised gardens, because if you are gardening in the soil and you have contaminants in the soil, you're probably getting some of it too. And you cannot control what your neighbors do, because whatever they do is going to end up in your soil too. So raised gardens help. And then we have foods that we call the clean ones and the dirty ones. A lot of the things that you bite into and eat immediately, a lot of the things that are sweet and they have soft skin, a lot of times these are the things that are easily contaminated because they're easy to eat. And that means that animals outside also find it easy. When they're easy to eat, they're sweet, they're tasty, you're not the only one who likes them. The other living organisms like them too. And if you notice, when you go to a garden, you will see everything visiting your garden. So you're trying to protect those your garden from those things. So those are those things that we call the dirty dozen or the dirty 15. We have lists of them. You can go online like nutritionfacts.org and you see the dirty dozen and so on. Those foods that are more likely to be sprayed with chemicals. You want to go more organic on those ones. Then there's some other foods. It doesn't matter how much chemicals you spray on them, unless you're really trying to poison people. Most of the times, those food, like things with really hard skins or thick covers, when you take off the skin and the cover, you've kind of taken away a lot of the risk. And then there are some other things. We have a lot of the health food stores have this vegetable and fruit wash, the produce wash, that you can use to soak your fruits and your vegetables and wash them so that you can get a lot of the chemicals that are either sprayed or used to preserve the food off of them. So again, what we have to think about is priorities. What are we doing to deter food producers from selling us foods that have been contaminated in some way, shape, or form with chemicals?
When you go by, and that's a text I just received. Before I read that text, if you have any questions, you can dial 240-603-7367. 240-603-7367. I'm going to read the question which Juan Jacob has posted. I'll come to that, but let me get to a text just sent me. The text reads, Doctor, when you go buy your vegetables and fruits and come to your kitchen with them before you eat them, what do you wash them with? That's a question I have just received from a viewer.
So normally, if you're washing those things with clean water, you run clean water over them for a while. You first of all inspect for dirt, like things that you can actually see, and then you wash them over with clean water. Sometimes with some vegetables and some fruit, you can rinse them with some vinegar before you wash them. You rinse them out with vinegar. And then some other things you may have to scrub them, like things that really have rough and thick surfaces. You have produce scrub that you can use to scrub them. And again, I mentioned the fruit and vegetable washes that you put on the food. You let it sit for like 5 or 10 minutes, and then you wash off, and you'll see a lot of residue coming off, because these are things that we use to preserve the food and to also protect it while it was growing. I'm also seeing Mr. Jacob asked another question online. And it says,
he says, why do women find it difficult these days to cover their hair when cooking or serving food? The question I will add to that is it possible to contaminate food when cooking when your hair is uncovered?
Oh, it is very possible. And it's not out of any kind of malice. It is just what happens. That's why when you go again, I always say when you're trying to answer questions, look at the people that are doing it professionally, and you can kind of tell why they do it. When you go to restaurants and so on, a lot of times the chefs have hats on, they cover their hair. They wear gloves, they wear all those things, they wear aprons. And the reason is because they're trying to reduce contamination from foreign objects as much as possible. Your hair, sometimes you don't have to do anything. And if you have hair, we lose hair a lot at different points in time. Your hair could just fall in the food. And it's usually disgusting to see hair in food. So I don't think it's out of malice. I cannot speak for the women that don't cover their hair. I think they're thinking more about convenience, but also they're not really thinking a lot about the risk that their hair poses to the food they're preparing. Personally, it embarrasses me if I ever cook food and I see hair in it. I am so embarrassed, and I can't speak for anybody else, but to each their own.
When you go to some homes, you find a lot of roaches running around the place in the kitchen. I've visited homes, and once I see that, it gets difficult for me to eat anything offered to me in that home. But do you have situations, any possibilities that roaches would contaminate food in the kitchen?
Absolutely. I mean, those are those are things that contaminate food. I do not like roaches at all. And every once in a while we see them here, like in South Carolina, we have what we call the palmetto bug. And it's I hate them. I hate roaches. I hate creepy crawlies. Let's put it that way. And sometimes you may be living in an apartment complex or in a building that is connected to other buildings. And no matter how much you clean, if your neighbor is keeping the house dirty or they're not taking care of their roach problem, you're going to end up with it too. And then sometimes, all you need is a little bit of carelessness. You could go and put your bag somewhere and in a place where there are roaches, and the roach is going to get in, and you bring it home, and then they start multiplying. So, but what they have found is that roaches have places, niches where they like to grow, damp, wet places, dark, and also where there's access to food. So your goal is to make life unpleasant for them. Apart from exterminating, you want to make life unpleasant for the roaches. Don't give them stuff that they can grow off of.
Let me talk to you a little bit, or maybe ask a question which many people are going to relate with or relate to. I was in Yaoundé, sometimes in Cameroon. I was traveling from one town to another town, and you pass by this city or through this city where you have bush meat and so on. This was in 1989. I ate bush meat, went back to Yaoundé, and almost died. And I was asking what was going on, and then I got to be told that sometimes people use unorthodox methods in handling or even catching those animals in the bush. You want to comment on that?
Yes, sir. So first of all, the animals in the bushes. My dad used to make this joke. He says, "Oh, I don't eat that because it's not vaccinated." I mean, there are a few things he eats, but he used to make that comment, and we laugh so hard because, of course, they are in the wild, and we don't know what they've been exposed to. But the other thing is that, like you said, we don't know how people trap this animal, because for you to catch an animal in the bush, you have to trap it, right? You either go hunting or you trap the animal. Here, people do more hunting. Back at home, they set traps and then they go back and look for the traps. You don't know what they put in the traps. You don't know if those traps are rusted, contaminated, or anything. And then you bring it home, you don't even know how they handle it. You don't know how to process it. For example, when they're cutting it open, do they let the guts spill out, or things from the hide? Because those are the things that will contaminate the meat that you're going to eat.
We even hear that sometimes they use chemicals in trapping those animals.
Of course, remember I spoke about gamalin and fish. We had that when we were much younger. My mom went to Limbe, one of our seaports in Cameroon, and she bought some fish, and she didn't know that the fishermen had caught the fish with gamalin. Brought it home and we ate it, and everybody in the house was deathly ill. So those things happen. You don't know how people trap or how they hunt their animals and so on. And so you could be at very high risk of getting food contaminated, either from, remember we talked about the food distribution chain. Was it the production of the food? Was it the processing? Was it the distribution, or was it the preparation? And it could be any of those steps. I just want to say a quick hello to Dr. Gwanmesia. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to everybody else who is watching. We are so excited to have you. This is a very important topic. Thank you again.
When people use the water, we would think that, you use water to water your crops, water your vegetables. There is zero chance that those crops, the vegetables, the fruits, would be contaminated. People must be surprised that that happens depending on the water they use, the source of water that's coming from. You want to throw light on that, because we do that in our villages very often.
All right, so you get dirty water from maybe a gutter or something, and you say, well, it's just water. By the time it hits the ground and the food grows, nothing is going to happen. That water, once it's contaminated, is going to contaminate the soil, it's going to contaminate the food. You could get it. I talked about this other thing too, and it happens in a lot of places. People they live in very tight quarters, so they have a sewage disposal thing right there, and then they have their well right next to it. You can bet there's stuff seeping from one to the other, and it's contaminating, for example, the well. So a lot of times, like in the farm, what you can do is maybe put the well on higher ground so that it's clean water going down and not dirty water coming down. So put the well on higher grounds, put the other things that are more likely to contaminate on lower ground, so that the water is flowing down and it's, you're going from clean to dirty as opposed to from dirty to clean. So we have to start taking these things seriously. There's a reason why water is a big killer. Once water is contaminated, apart from drinking it, cooking with it, washing your food, even growing your food with it is a problem.
We also see back home, in a lot of African countries, you find that some food crops are grown next to maybe sewage systems and so on. I don't know what we do, why that's done, but what would you tell parents back in the villages, or some of us who don't know, because ignorance, believe me, it's not even about education, because you have educated people, literate people, so to speak, doing this, planting pumpkins, planting plantains, planting, I don't know, tomatoes, close to sockaway pits. What information, what would you tell them?
First of all, people do not listen to stuff unless they feel like it personally affects them. So one of the things we do in public health, we look at the risk assessment. You also look at the degree of danger, and that's why even collecting data is important. If you can show that a lot of people in that area are getting sick when they eat food and so on, you can start saying, hey, let's test the water, let's test the soil, let's test the plants and see if they're poisoned. But again, we don't have access to a lot of those things. That's really where public health comes in. But I think just helping people, sitting down and respectfully talking with them about the risks that they're posing to their nutrition and to their food source when they expose themselves to those contaminated waters is important. It doesn't matter how educated you are. There are some things that you don't know because you just don't know them. People have gone to school, but not everybody has done public health. Not everybody has done food safety. If I didn't do it, there are a lot of things that I wouldn't know either. So I'm not going to sit there and act like it's because they're just ignorant. It's really because they don't have that information. And that's part of why I would come on a place like this. Let's do this, because I really want people to become more knowledgeable. People need to start understanding what blessing we have in being alive, but also what responsibility we have in sustaining the earth and taking proper care of the resources that God has given us. So I think education is important. It's also acknowledging the fact that these people don't mean any harm and they are misunderstanding a lot of things because they don't know any better. Educate, empower, and advocate.
If you go to a party and add something which begins to ring a bell, what would you do? Or should people put maybe some Pepto-Bismol in their handbags just in case for emergency relief? What would you suggest somebody do if they went to a party, to a reception, and ate something and began like, this is not sounding right?
Okay, so I did some really nice background work on food poisoning. And if you don't mind, I'm going to take a little bit of time and talk about it.
Please go ahead.
So let's just do the human body a little bit. About 10 liters of water or fluid goes into our small intestine every day. So that's about 10 liters. Most of it gets absorbed in the small intestine, about 8.5 liters of it. And then the colon, which is the large intestine, absorbs another maybe 1.8 liters. So there's just about 0.2 liters, which is about 200 milliliters of fluid left that needs to come out of the body. And so when anything goes wrong, you can tell by the amount of maybe loose stool that comes out where this is happening. So for example, when you eat something that is not okay, either it's already poisoned and you already have toxins inside, or it has an overwhelming amount of bacteria, and it goes and irritates your stomach, you could just have diarrhea. You could just have the stomach disorder, and a lot of times it comes with diarrhea, sometimes nausea, vomiting, again, depending on what kind of infection it is. If you find that if the diarrhea is voluminous, so there are two kinds of diarrhea. It's either you're going too many times or your stool is very soft and not formed at all. So if you have large diarrhea, it's probably coming from the upper part of the stomach, because most of the fluid has not been absorbed, and that is what gives the stool a lot of volume. If it's in the larger parts of the intestine, you probably have smaller volumes of diarrhea. They kind of show up a little differently. You may have a little bit more small intestine. You may have, it's usually non-bloody. You can feel some discomfort around your stomach. You can feel some cramping, some nausea and vomiting. And again, we have a lot of bacteria that would cause that. And that's because it's disrupting the normal absorption of fluid in that part of the stomach. And remember, it absorbs, that upper part of the stomach absorbs most of the fluid. And then the diarrhea is typically mild. So usually it's large volumes. It's really mild because it's just disrupting the absorption and everything. But the problem with diarrhea is not the diarrhea itself, but it's what it does to your body. And again, especially in different groups of people. So if you're losing a lot of fluids and you're throwing up, that means you're not only losing water, you're also disrupting the chemicals in your body. We call them electrolytes. And you need to replenish them, because that's what gets people in trouble. And then when you go to the large intestine, sometimes there could be fever, it could be bloody diarrhea, and so on. And that means that there's some degree of damage to your colon. So again, it depends on what is happening. Most diarrheas will go away on their own, but there are warning signs that you should look for that should make you seek help. And there are also groups of people that you should be always concerned about. So average length of a diarrhea is about 5 to 7 days. Some people, it may just be a few days. It may be even less than that. Okay. But with proper hydration, so meaning a lot of fluid, especially water, and I'm going to talk about rehydration fluid in a moment. And then sometimes we have anti-diarrheal agents like Imodium or Pepto-Bismol. Those are the two common ones, and then resting your bowel, because what happens is that your bowel is irritated. You don't need to add any more stuff that will make it more irritated. Things like oily foods, dairy products, heavy foods, alcohol, caffeine, all of those things usually make your stomach more irritated. So you want to rest the bowel. It's almost like when you break a leg, right? You don't want to start jumping on that leg before the leg heals. You want to kind of give it a break and let it heal. And so it's the same thing with the bowel. So when you're feeling sick, the most important thing you want to do is hydrate, and also replenish your electrolytes. And then the things that you should be worried about, why should you start thinking about going to see a doctor? One, if you have diarrhea for more than 7 days, that is a problem, because that means you're losing way too much. If you have fevers greater than 38.5 degrees Celsius, if you have blood in your diarrhea, or you have severe abdominal pain, that is always a warning sign. If you have more than 6 unformed stools in one day, you need to think about seeing a doctor. If you're just having a whole lot of diarrhea, because where is that coming from? That's body fluid you're losing. And then if you're talking about patients in the sensitive group, so children under 5, older patients, people that have any kind of compromise to their immune system, for example, if they have some kind of cancer, if they have HIV, if they have organ transplant and they're taking immune suppressants, or even people with autoimmune diseases where they're suppressing their immune system because their body is not able to put up a good fight. So you have to help them along the way. And then if you also have diarrhea that happened in people that were in the hospital, you have to look out for it, because again, one, they're kind of frail, but also it's probably something they've picked up in the hospital and you want to address it quickly. So those are the things that you want to be looking for. Now, we talked about resting your stomach. You want to eat small meals, frequent small meals. You want to eat things that are soft and easily digested. And that's when we talk about the BRAD diet, the bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast. You want to do soups and crackers, bland foods that don't require your stomach to do too much work. It's just to keep you, to give you nutrients, but not overwork your stomach. Now, the biggest problem with diarrhea is dehydration. So you have those patients that are high risk. We talked about them: children, frail, elderly, and so on. And you want to make sure that you're giving them fluids that have sodium, potassium, chloride, bicarbonate, and citrate. So just a quick example, right? If you want to prepare a rehydration fluid at home, there's a convenient mixture. Again, I'll give you a little formula here. You take 1 liter of water, clean water, because you don't want to make things worse. So 1 liter of clean water, probably bottled water that is, that we know that has been treated well. You want to put half a teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 8 teaspoons of sugar, and 8 ounces of orange juice, and mix it up and keep drinking. You don't have to drink all at once. Just keep sipping through the day. You're basically replenishing what your body is losing. And the goal is to give fluids at 50 to 200, again, mils per kilogram every 24 hours. So we talked about the anti-diarrheal agents. And again, the last thing you want to do is seek the doctor's care when you have all the symptoms you talked about. And usually when that happens, they could do some testing. They could also put you on some antibiotics to make sure that they can stop this thing before it becomes a nightmare for you and for your body. And I'm going to talk about maybe 1 or 2 other things like botulism after this, because I think that's pretty important, and listeria, because that's pretty important.
Before you get there, I just had a text from somebody, and the text reads, Doctor, when you go to a party and eat something and it's not working, you start feeling very, very ill at ease. Are there some foods which you can turn around and grab and eat, maybe, which can counter the toxins that you've taken? That's the text that's coming on to my phone.
No, sir, because once you have toxins in the food, it's almost like ready to go. It's already been fired. It's almost like saying, if a bullet is about to explode, can I catch it? Or if a bomb is about to explode, can I catch it? The goal is to contain it. You can't prevent it from exploding anymore. It's already too late. So once you have consumed the poison, there's really nothing you can do to counter it, but you can now mitigate the symptoms and also mitigate the complications that could come after that.
Okay.
And remember, when with food poisoning, what do you want to do? You want to rest your bowels. So you don't want to punish your bowels any further.
Thank you so much. And before Doctor takes the last segment of our presentation, let me say, if you have any questions, you can dial the number 240-603-7367. I repeat, 240-603-7367. You can text me as others have been doing, or you can put a comment. We will see it in the system and take your question over to the doctor. Yes, Dr. B. Tatsongfumunda.
So I want to talk about some things that really stand out in food poisoning, and then I want to talk about the 4 things that we really insist upon in safe food handling. There is so much to discuss about this topic. For example, when people have outdoors events and they're carrying food, what do you do? Again, you want to use all those safety measures we talked about. You want to separate the food. You want to wash, separate, chill, and cook. So let me just go over a nice little list we have here. So the 4 things you want to do: wash. So lots of hand washing, washing the food you bought to. That's really important. Washing the tools and the equipment that you use. You don't want to cross-use things because you're going to cross-contaminate. If you've used them on raw meat and so on, you don't want to use them on ready-to-eat foods or foods that have already that don't require a lot of cooking, because you're going to cross-contaminate. So the next thing is separate. Remember, we talked about it right from the start. In fact, even during transportation, you want to separate foods. Everything doesn't get to go together. Separate the raw meats, poultry, seafood, and eggs from other foods in your grocery shopping cart, and even in the bath and in the refrigerator. So everywhere you put this food, they have to be separate. You don't mix them. You want to use different cutting boards for fresh produce and for a lot of the raw meat, poultry, fish, and so on. Use different cutting boards. Another thing is, when you're preparing the food, you want to make sure that you usually we recommend that you cut the produce first. You prepare it and you refrigerate it, and then you go to the meats and so on. So that way, when there's contamination, you can finish off, and you know that you're not exposing your other stuff to it, and then you can wash your things down carefully. And then never place cooked food on a plate that has previously been holding raw foods, because you're just going to cross-contaminate. Remember, that's a big part of food poisoning, cross-contamination. Then we talked about cooking. So 1, if you're buying a prepackaged food or it's being pre-cooked, follow the instructions strictly. There's a reason why you do that, because you want to make sure that even the little contamination that has happened in there, like bacteria and so on, with cooking at the right temperatures, you can kill most of them. And you can't go by your eyes. That's why it's a good idea to have a thermometer, a thermometer that you can stick into food. There are food thermometers. You can stick it into the middle and make sure that the heat got all the way into the middle of the food, because that means that the food has been properly cooked all the way into the center. If you don't do that, you may think the outside is cooked, but the inside is still contaminated. And then another thing you want to do is, when cooking in things like microwaves and so on, you want to make sure that you're constantly stirring the food and rotating it so that the heat hits everything in the food. Refrigerate foods promptly. So what we recommend, again, when you have the food and you've prepared it, or you buy it from the store and it's supposed to be cold, you want to put them in the fridge as quickly as possible. Usually within 2 hours of grocery shopping or 2 hours of preparing the food. If it's on a day that is greater than 90 degrees Fahrenheit, you want to refrigerate it within 1 hour. And what you can do too with food, sometimes when you cook large amounts of foods that you want to save, you can put them in smaller containers so that they can cool faster, and that way they can get into the refrigerator faster. And you want to make sure that your refrigerator is actually holding its temperature at less than 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we talked about and then the hot foods, you want to keep them hot until they're either served or they cool down and you put them away. So you don't want to keep hot foods sitting around. You don't want to keep hot foods outside of the danger zone. Now, I wanted to mention something too. There's something I see a lot of people do, and I want to bring it up because it's an important part. When you have a sponge that you use to wash plates in your kitchen, I see people, when they finish washing the plates, they use that same sponge to wash the sink and to wash the counter and so on. That is not okay, because you have a lot of bacteria and microorganisms that build up in those things. Even when you're washing, your sink, it gets contaminated, because even the food that you've washed, particles of it remain in the sink. And that's why sometimes if you don't wash your sink properly, you can start getting those smells, because food is decomposing. So that stuff is getting contaminated, the counter and so on. You should have a different sponge that you use to wash plates and so on, or things that you used to eat with. And you should have a different sponge for washing your sink. And then you should keep your sponge dry after, rinse it properly and keep it dry after each use. Because when it's damp and moist and at the right temperature, guess who is growing very fast? Bacteria and other microorganisms. And they will contaminate your food, they will contaminate your plates, and so on. And then another thing too is that you don't want to keep sponges forever. When they start getting old, usually we have a short time frame that you should throw them away and get new ones. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up was, some particular things that we want to talk about: botulism, and then we also have listeria. And botulism is something like a paralytic disease. I don't have time to go into all the details right now. It can cause paralysis, and it starts from the head and goes all the way down, and it literally can kill you. Again, a lot of people that are immunocompromised, how does botulism happen? It can happen with food that is not properly handled. It can happen in infants, and it can happen from wounds. So food that is not properly handled, a lot of times canned foods that are sealed or smoked, if they don't do it properly, the food can be contaminated, and there will be botulinum in there. In fact, if you think about botulism, think about the Botox that they give to a lot of people to relax muscles and get rid of wrinkles. That's what botulinum toxin does. It relaxes muscles, not only there, but in your body. And if you have a poison, it relaxes muscles that should not stay relaxed. And that's why it can cause death. It can cause paralysis. And so you have that. So you have to really be mindful of things that are frozen or put in jars or smoked. And then with children, the recommendation is not to give children honey, not to give honey to children who are less than 1 year old, because part of what helps us in our stomach is our immune system. And it starts with your mouth, but it also goes into your stomach. You have acid in there, and the acid helps to kill a lot of things. Babies don't have a well-developed immune system, and they don't have enough acid in their stomach to fight this botulinum toxin. So you want to avoid giving honey to young babies. And then listeria is really common and then of course the other part of botulism is when you get punctures, wounds that are deep and so on. You have to really be careful, because it's not only tetanus you have to worry about, you have to worry about botulism too. And then the other thing is listeria, and the biggest concern is with pregnant women. This is found especially in pasteurized milk and dairy products and so on. So when you're pregnant, you really want to avoid a lot of those things, because one, your immune system is a little bit compromised when you're pregnant. And then the second part is that it could cause a lot of damage to the mother, but especially to the child. And a lot of women have had miscarriages from listeria. So be really mindful. Try not to eat raw eggs, raw or unpasteurized foods. Be very careful with those ones.
The tentacles of food poisoning can be so widespread. Honestly, I'm learning a lot. I mean, when we talk about food poisoning, I'm thinking about the ndole that I ate at parties and came back home and couldn't sleep. This show is slated to be around 1 hour. Do you have certain other areas you want to conclude on before we go? By the way, you are watching the maiden edition of Healthline on Chat Night Africa.
We love Chat Night Africa. Keep watching Chat Night Africa.
Dr. B. Tadsong Famunda, with what would you like to conclude this maiden edition of Healthline?
All right. So again, thank you for taking time to listen. If I'm going to conclude, I'm going to say, one, how do you prevent food poisoning? I'm just going to give a quick summary. Remember, we talked clean, separate, cook, and chill. Keeping food out of the danger zone. You can prevent some food poisoning by properly storing, cooking, cleaning, and handling food. For example, keep raw meat, poultry, seafood, and eggs separate from other foods. Prepare salads and refrigerate them before handling raw meats and poultry and those things. Promptly refrigerate or freeze foods that can spoil. Wash your hands with soap and water before and after handling food. Wash fruits and vegetables before eating, cutting, or cooking. Cook foods long enough and at high enough temperatures as recommended to kill the harmful microbes. Wash utensils and surfaces after each use. Don't eat food that can spoil and that has been sitting out for beyond the recommended time. Remember, we talked about it, 2 hours on a regular day, 1 hour on a hot day. And then, of course, always think about the people that are at high risk: infants and children, pregnant women and their babies that are to be born, older adults, and people with weak immune systems. Another thing you can do is, I don't know if we do this in Cameroon, I think in a sort of way we do it, but it's not as organized as here. We have what we call food recalls. We have government websites where you can go and check for recalled stuff. Always check in your stores. They have things that they post on food recalls. If a food is recalled, please don't eat it. Take it back to the store. Here in the US, you can take it back to the store and they'll refund your money. I don't know what they do at home, but even if they won't refund your money, is it really worth putting your life at risk for? I don't think so. Now, the one thing too that affects a lot of us is travelers' diarrhea. And how do you reduce your risk? And again, unfortunately, this is a common thing when you travel to less developed countries. I hate to call it that, but that's what it is at this point. Because we don't have we don't follow a lot of the rules. We don't have potable water. People can only be as faithful as their options. So if you find yourself traveling, what can you do? You want to avoid unbottled or untreated water. Always, even to brush your teeth, use bottled water, use clean treated water. Tap water, well, lake, or river water may contain microbes. You want to avoid even things like ice or foods that are prepared with untreated water because the contamination just carries on. You want to avoid unpasteurized milk, juices, yogurt, and all those kinds of things. You want to avoid food from street vendors. That's kind of, dicey too because I have eaten from food vendors, but the only thing I'll eat is food that is actually being cooked right. They take it from the raw and we watch them cook it and it comes straight off the fire. But also I watch what the person is doing. You can't guarantee everything. It might be contaminated before it gets there, but if you see them not handling it right or they're cooking in a really dirty environment, that kind of gives you warning signs. So you really want to avoid that or be very mindful. You want to warm your foods if it's a food that is not served hot, you want to make sure that you heat it up properly before you eat it. You want to be careful with undercooked meats, fish, and shellfish. And then also try to avoid a lot of foods that are pre-prepared that you did not do yourself because you don't know what they use, how they handle the food, or what they use to prepare the food, including how they washed it. So those are things that you can do to help yourself. Now, if you find yourself in trouble, which most of us will do in spite of all the care we take, you want to avoid things like caffeine drinks. You want to avoid coffee and tea. Again, those are all caffeinated drinks and soft drinks because a lot of times they irritate your stomach some more. You want to avoid foods that are high in fat, such as fried foods, pizza, and fast foods. You want to avoid foods that contain large amounts of sugar because remember, sugar too is like a diuretic. It makes you keep losing more fluid, sweetened beverages and so on, they make you lose more fluid. And the last thing you want to do is lose more fluid when you're dehydrated or you're suffering from diarrhea. And then you also want to avoid milk and milk products because again, some people may have intolerance, it gives them diarrhea, but it also kind of overworks the stomach. So those are things that you want to keep in mind. Every day that we are alive is a gift, but it's also with every gift comes a responsibility. If you give your child a nice car, it's not enough that you're giving them a car. They need to learn how to drive it well. So being alive, being able to eat is a gift, but we need to handle these things with care and we need to be diligent in starting from the leadership that is in charge of making sure that they pass good laws and that people actually follow the laws. So this is another issue that we talked about last time, that people that are responsible for protecting the public, please, 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 really think about it carefully and realize that it is not okay to be involved in corruption. You're putting a lot of lives at risk and you're actually inadvertently responsible for the deaths of a lot of people, and that is something that is not okay. So please keep that in mind and do what you need to do. Mr. Chamukong, I just want to say thank you to everybody here. I also want to thank everybody that has helped me to learn what I've learned. I want to always remember my program director, Dr. Michael Noe. He was my program director in preventive medicine. He gave us a rich experience, Dr. Carl Lee, and all the other people there who taught us well and who helped us. The Erie County Health Department, that's where we did a lot of things. In fact, Erie County, we did a lot of our training there, inspected restaurants, inspected daycares, hotels, and we did a lot of cool stuff. And that's kind of how I learned all these things. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
I want to thank you more. Dr. Bita Zongfumunda, I remember when we started this platform, Chat Night Africa, it used to be a matter of rotating phones and the platform didn't look any close to what it looks now. It is now. And but you stuck by us. You have been one of the biggest supporters of Chat Night Africa platform. You've supported in different ways. We are so grateful to you. I don't know what fuels your passion, because we contacted some people, they were not interested, and yet you threw your weight right behind what we wanted to do. That's why we can do what we are doing. I thank you so much, Dr. B. Tadzong Fumunda.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
But beyond that, I want to thank your father, your mom, Pat Tadzong, and Mrs. Tadzong, for bringing to the world this beautiful woman, this smart, intelligent woman, this woman who gives so selflessly. You're sharing your knowledge here just so that somebody doesn't die, somebody doesn't get rushed to hospital because they went somewhere and ate something. Somebody doesn't die because they just stored food the wrong way or cultivated it the wrong way, or bought stuff from where you have garbage mountains all over the place, thinking that when they cook it, it'll be okay. I'm so grateful. And lots of people who will watch this broadcast later on, it's on YouTube. Simply search the channel on YouTube, ChatNet Africa. It is on the website, it's on the internet now running, www.chatnetafrica.net. It's on our Facebook page. So we are everywhere. It's thanks to your support that we can do this, Dr. B. Tadzong Fumunda. Can you say why this moves you? Why did you, at the beginning, from the start, decide that this was something you needed to support?
It's not enough to complain about what's wrong. Everybody can complain. What are you doing to make a difference? I love people. I may not always reach out as often as I would like to, but I always think well of people. I wish well for people. I want people to live out their full God-given potential. And how else do you help people but give them the tools they need? You know, I believe that change really comes with education, empowerment, and advocacy. So people are only as faithful as their options. Give them more options so they can make better choices. So you give them the information they need and help them, realize that you have the power to make these choices. And then, of course, advocate. So every time you're in a place where you can make a difference, please make a difference. Don't think only about yourself. This world is made up of billions of people. That's for a pretty good reason. You are a beneficiary of other people's kindness. Give back. You're not better than other people. You're not better than other people. You're just favored and blessed. And so spread the blessing. There are people that would have done so much better if they had a chance. And so I have learned over time that we are all beneficiaries of other people's kindness. So keep sowing. You're not the only one it's not only your family members and friends that will benefit. There are a lot of other people that will benefit. And you don't know what life holds. Tomorrow, somebody who benefited from your help may be the very person that saves your life. So I just want us to start thinking about life as we are all parts of one body. You don't have to know me for me to help you. I don't have to know you. I just have to sow the seeds. If you come by and harvest and it's a blessing to you, I am excited. That keeps me going, helping people do better, be better, and become what God wants them to be. God bless you.
Thank you. That's so powerful. Honestly, when I asked you that question, I wasn't expecting anything close to this. Thank you, Dr. B. Tadzong Fumunda.
Thank you, sir.
It's on that very, very instructive, insightful note by Dr. B. Tadzong Fumunda that we end this maiden edition of Healthline. I want to thank all of you watching. I want to thank all of you who are going to be watching this later on, because lots of people will be watching later on. It's on YouTube, it's on the internet, it's on Facebook, it's on LinkedIn. My name is Divine Chamukong, and before I go, let me make this call. If you know somebody who is making a difference, somebody who has invented something that is serving large populations wherever in the world, somebody who is putting smiles in the faces of people without expecting any payback, by all means, let us know. This is what we created this platform to promote. I am anchoring this broadcast from Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, thanks to my friend, my right-hand person, my lieutenant, that's Ze Roger Full, who is staying up awake in Lagos, Nigeria, thousands of miles from away from Washington, D.C., to make sure that this program is aired right. Thank you, Roger, and God bless you. God bless your wife. God bless your children. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how I say goodbye to you. I'll see you soon and very soon for yet another edition.
I'm coming back. I'm coming back. I'm coming. Coming to get down. I'm coming. I'm coming. Coming to dance. To dance. We're gonna dance. We're gonna dance. We're gonna get down. We're gonna get down. We're gonna party. Party hardy. We're gonna boogie. Boogie woogie. And when we jam, it's out of sight. This song right here, it's dynamite. I'm ready.